My name is Jennifer Wygand. I am an elementary art teacher and a graduate student at TTU, Texas Tech University. And today I have the pleasure to introduce Martha Underriner. Martha was a student in my first ceramics course at TTU, and during the course I felt like I had two teachers, so I was really fortunate. I owe a lot of her success, or a lot of my successes, to her mentorship. Currently, Martha Underriner is a 7th to 12th grade art teacher at Prestonwood Christian Academy in Plano, Texas. She received her BFA in ceramics from the UNT, University of North Texas, and she is currently, and that was in 2008, and she recently completed her master's degree in art education from Texas Tech University in December 2015. Martha primarily teaches ceramics and is a practicing artist based in Dallas, Texas. This morning, she's going to share thoughts about what a majority of our students love the most, and it's having choice in the ceramics classroom. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Martha Underriner.
So as art educators, we have a unique position. We are able to create a space that allows students to be makers, to find creative solutions, and to safely explore ideas. The National Core of Art Standards for Visual Arts includes 4 main components: to create, to present, to respond, and to connect. So through the visual arts, we can guide students into drawing connections from their art making and into their future careers and communities. But in order to do this as educators, we can and we must adapt flexibility and adaptability in the classroom to meet the needs and abilities of our students, particularly in the use of choice-based learning. So giving students choices in the project design and implementation in the ceramics classroom encourages students to think independently, creatively, and more deeply about what they are making. Allowing students more choices can seem like a daunting task for the educator, but however, I propose that a teacher-guided process of research and careful planning before students begin working, as well as a period of individual reflection after completion of a project, makes choice-based learning approachable. So with sufficient preparation, you can have a classroom full of independent, self-sustaining learners who are eager to create in clay with a voice and a passion. Using a choice-based curriculum will also free you up as a teacher to spend less time lecturing or demonstrating and more time with the students to meet their individual needs. So today I will be sharing with you the basics, the benefits, and the challenges in a choice-based classroom. I'll be sharing with you how I structure my lessons and images of all my student projects, and that all the images you see today are a result of implementing choice-based learning in my ceramics classroom. All right, so first, what is choice-based classroom? What does it look like? So a choice-based classroom is one where students find solutions to artistic problems, where students choose what they work on, and where students are a part of a collaborative learning community. I often hear my students say that they love that they get to make whatever they want in my classroom, but in reality, they're doing exactly what I want them to be doing, which is making informed, creative, and elaborate pieces. So the benefits of choice-based classroom are a higher level of student engagement, much more exciting and creative results, and the ability to teach multiple levels at once. So in my classroom, I often have 4 different levels of classes combined together, and teaching all of them at once can be a challenge. But when I moved my classroom over to a more choice-based approach, I found that my students were more independent, and it allowed me to help facilitate a better learning environment for each of them. So a bonus to choice-based learning is that it also automatically differentiates to each student's level and ability. All right, so some of the obstacles of choice-based learning. So some of the obstacles you might face are maybe the fear or the potential for chaos, the daunting task of planning, an entire grading period ahead of time, and the time commitment required for students to be successful. because sometimes they fail too along the way, and we want them to ultimately be successful, so that takes a little extra time to help them through that process. So for successful choice-based learning, planning is going to be the most important factor. So one efficient way to plan is with the end goal in mind and work your way backwards. So determine which objectives you need your students to meet and give yourself a wide time frame. So I usually go by grading period, which is about 9 weeks, but yours may be 6 weeks, or maybe you have 3 weeks, to allow them time to achieve those objectives. So during this planning process, consider the needs and abilities of your students. And if you have beginner level or young students, you may just want to consider giving them a couple of choices to start with. And then for the advanced or more mature students, you can give more open-ended options and increased challenges. So for my high school classes, I often give 2 or 3 projects for a whole grading period and allow them to choose the time and the order spent on each. All right, so I'm going to share with you a structure of my 8th grade ceramics project that's totally based on choice. So I'm going to go over the whole lesson with you and how I structure it. So this is a project I've refined over the years. So like I said earlier, with younger students, you could take this lesson and take away some of the looseness of it. And if you have high school students, you could incorporate more of the objectives you need them to meet into this project. So all the images that are with this project are all from my 8th grade classroom. These are all projects that have come from this choice-based project that we do. And so this is just a regular art class, so they also learn, painting and drawing. So we only have a couple of ceramics projects over the year with them, but it's always one of my favorites for the year. So the most important part of a choice-based project is to communicate clear objectives to your students. So in your curriculum, you may have 20 ceramics objectives for your students to meet. But giving students that many objectives is overwhelming and unproductive. So I narrow down my objectives and give my students 2 or 3 objectives for their project, whether it's a technique to use, an application of elements and principles, or an incorporation of historical or contemporary practice. So most of the smaller objectives, such as learning how to slip and score, will be realized as the student is actually working with the clay and reflecting on their learning throughout the process. So for my 8th grade project, I give them objectives to make a 3D form that is interesting from all angles and to utilize 2 textures to create unity. All of the other technical objectives that I know they need to meet will be met throughout the process. So because I balance so many skill levels and I allow my students to self-pace their learning in my classroom, I frequently film instructional videos as a reference for my students. So this allows them to spend more time making art in my classroom and less time watching me demonstrate different techniques. So building an archive of videos also allows my students to access the content they need without waiting for me to be available. So there are so many resources out there for educators, and so much technology is available. You can flip your classroom and have students watch demos at home, research and plan all before they come to class. You can also use resources like Blend-Space, Canvas, Edpuzzle, or even just a simple blog to help set up the learning path for your students. Blend-Space allows you to put different activities in the order that you want your students to do them, so you can have them watch a video, then write a journal, then analyze artwork, and more, all in the order that you want. Edpuzzle actually allows you to edit a YouTube video so that it stops and asks questions for students as they watch the video, and this can be a good way to help those students who may want to rush ahead of the project or skip through any of the learning techniques that you have for them. But with technology in the classroom, I can divide students up into groups or levels, and some can have one-on-one instruction with me, while another group researches and designs. So this allows students to spend more one-on-one time with the teacher in their creative process. And then for this particular 8th grade project I'm going to show you, I introduced students to coil building and sculpture making and practicing hollowing out solid pieces. So here are some of the images from my demonstration videos. It's really easy to do just on your phone now. It doesn't take very long, and then you don't have to do it, multiple times over and over again. Because anytime someone has a question and you can't help them right away, you can always just direct them to the right video, because it's still me teaching, but they're just watching it from an earlier time. So I have videos from everything to wedging, to joining slabs, throwing, coil building, to entire projects for my students on YouTube. So whatever I introduce, I always tell my classes that if they have a better idea than I do, just to tell me what it is, and chances are I'll let them do it and I'll help them do it. So more than anything, I just want my students to love what they're doing. All right, now the next step is going to vary widely according to what you're teaching. So for a beginner level student, I may give more parameters that utilize a specific technique or objective that they need to meet. And for advanced students, my parameters for the project will be open-ended, but can also include a complex technique or idea, such as exploring a social justice issue, a narrative they want to share, or a problem they want to solve that relates to function and design. For my 8th grade class, I like to have students find contemporary artists to inspire them, so I have them flip through ceramic monthlies or Instagram to find some artists to look at. I have my students write down everything in their sketchbook so that they can keep a record of their process. And I create questions that utilize higher order thinking levels to allow students to deeply analyze the work that they're making and apply ideas into their own lives. So from there, I have students print out pictures of artist work, of pictures of textures they may want to replicate, pictures of 3D forms, or whatever relates to the prompt. And all of this goes into their sketchbooks with writings from the research portion of the project. So then students will sketch out their ideas, and I show students how to look at other work and to try a form they like from one piece, a texture from another, and how to combine it into their own original idea. So I like having students print out images that inspire them, or at least store them in one place, because it helps me check the originality of their work so I can see what their inspirations were, and if it's too close to one of their inspirations, I discuss with them ways to make it more original. So I have students do multiple sketches after that, because no matter what they say, their first one is not always their best one. And after students have written, researched, and sketched, I encourage them to share ideas and collaborate with each other. And after they sketch their designs, I talk with each student individually for a critique before they start making their work. So in this stage, it is of utmost importance to be honest with your students. My students know that I love them, I care about them, I respect them, and that I will be completely honest with them. So if a student has an idea that could use improvement, I dialogue with them about ways to develop it further. And I may even give them extra research that could be beneficial to their thought process. But by being honest with my feedback, I demonstrate to students how critiques of each other's work can be valuable in the creative process. So my students are often sending videos to each other, sharing social media posts about ceramic artists, or sharing ideas with their fellow classmates. And from my experience, I believe that building a classroom that encourages communication and collaboration among students will benefit them immensely. All right, assessment, our favorite word, right? Oh, we hear so much about assessment in our classrooms. I like to find ways to assess my students that don't take away too much time from the actual creating time, because really in an art classroom, we're assessing students' progress all the time as we walk around and talk with them and work with them. But in a choice-based classroom setting, formative assessment is going to be a very important tool to hold your students accountable for time management and also to check their understanding. So I periodically throughout a project have students journal about what they're learning, about the creative process, about artists, and even just about setting goals to help keep them on track. And this allows me to see what level of understanding they have so that I can tailor my class time to help them achieve a deeper level of understanding. And I also utilize peer critiques as a method of formative assessment. I like to call them quick crits, so they last about 5 minutes or less. And oftentimes their peers will reinforce the suggestions that I give them, or they may come up with some completely different idea that may be beneficial to the student. So I'm always surprised and excited by the out-of-the-box suggestions that come up from students in critique. And when the projects are glazed and finished, I have students present their pieces and the knowledge that they have gained to the class. So it's really important to give a guided reflection time. Giving students time to reflect allows them to make connections from their new knowledge and their interests to their interests, their future studies, and personal lives. So I've had several of my students who want to continue on to study how to make prosthetic limbs, all inspired by their time sculpting in ceramics class. So that's a surprising way that I've seen students connect ceramics to their future lives. All right, so by giving students more options in the classroom, they have the opportunity to make informed decisions about their work, and through the guided process of research, planning, making, and reflection, students gain increased agency in their artistic practice and learn to be more independent in the entire timeline of artistic creation. I have to admit, I was very nervous whenever I first started thinking and implementing a choice-based classroom, because I could not be more excited with with the results and how things have turned out. My students' pieces are original, individual, and technically excellent, but all of this comes from the students. They are engaged because they're finding solutions to their creative problems, and they are motivated to make their creations, and I'm just there to give them a little bit of guidance on how to do it. So now here is a project that I use at in my first beginning ceramics class at the high school level. So this is for students who maybe have taken Art 1 and are just coming into ceramics. So obviously you have to start with the technical idea. So I start with slabs. But I wanted to create something a little different that wasn't just a slab box or something like that. So my students have to use slabs for at least a little part of this project. And some students who maybe have had me before can use the techniques that they've learned in years past. So building on your techniques over the years, especially if you teach multiple grade levels, I found has been a really big part of my choice-based classroom. So my objectives for the project were to build slabs to create a 3D form that is not a rectangle or square box, and to utilize at least 2 textures throughout the piece. So this 9th grade student created a teapot as her first high school ceramics project because she was engaged and eager to learn. So I took a little extra time to help her understand handles, lids, and spouts, but she took the initiative and she created her own unique piece. So she used a hexagon for the shape and created her own imaginative idea from the objectives I gave her. And she definitely met all of my objectives and went well beyond that. So in the next 2 projects, you can see that one student went above and beyond. He created a lid even though it wasn't required of him. And then another student used slabs to create her form. There was not a square or a rectangle. And then she spent most of her time, a long time, sculpting all the flowers to go around her piece. So she still used slabs. She still learned how to put pieces of clay together. But she went on her own path and learned techniques that she wanted to learn to create her vision. So the student on the left spent, I don't know how many hours, creating each and every one of those little fish scales using slabs, I might add. She created a simple slab form, but she focused on utilizing textures in an effective way. The student on the right, she kept a more simple form, but really focused on the textures, creating unity around the piece. So in this slide, I had a student who used, a half-sphere mold to make a teapot using slabs, and he was still meeting the objectives and went above and beyond to create the parts of the teapot, as well as a reed and wire handle. So each of these students had the same objectives. They had peer critiques. They went through an editing process to make their ideas better, and each one pursued completely different ideas. Each of the pieces reflects the students that made them in a way that I could never dictate. By giving my students the freedom to be creative, they can reach their maximum potential. So as I move into my more advanced classes, I try to focus on ways to allow my students to explore ideas in a more conceptual way to allow for more creative freedom. Usually by the time my students are at the end of the beginner class and into the intermediate class, I rarely dictate what techniques they need to use. I tell them they can use throwing, slabs, coils, or sculptural processes. And sometimes I might make them combine several of those into one piece if I feel like they're not stretching themselves enough. So in my classroom, I encourage a culture that pursues different techniques, even if they might fail. My students know I won't fail them if they try something difficult and it doesn't work. In a choice-based classroom, it's important not to punish students for taking risks, because if you fail them for working hard on something, why would they try? It's important to have high expectations and not to tolerate too much laziness, but also not to crush a student in their hard work. Mutual trust and respect are critical for a choice-based classroom to be successful. So for this project, I showed students examples of contemporary woven baskets. We watched videos on basket weaving, and students looked through books and images of artists like Julia Parker. We talk about elements and principles and how to replicate those ideas in clay, but not actually weaving in clay. So for this project, my objectives were for students to create a piece in clay that was inspired by contemporary woven baskets, but not actually weaving with the clay itself. So with this teapot, the student was inspired by repetitive patterns and textures in the baskets, and she focused on texture as her inspiration for her piece from the woven baskets. So both of these students were inspired by the repetitive linear quality that they saw in the woven baskets and recreated it through making coil vases and attached textures. And these students were inspired by the actual weaving process, and since they couldn't weave with actual clay, they chose to make pieces with wire components, with woven wire. So the first student created a slab piece that she carved away meticulously and incorporated the woven inspiration into the handle to create her lantern. And the second student created a coil pot that she punched holes in, glazed, and wove metal wire for the rest of the piece. And this student took an entirely different approach and was inspired by the more traditional patterns that she saw in the baskets. She sculpted a cow skull and created her own repetitive designs based off the woven baskets with china paints onto her sculpture. So each of these students had the same objectives, and each of them created an entirely different piece through choice-based learning. So throughout this project, students collaborated, critiqued each other, and cheered each other on. And at the end of the project, students shared what they learned and we evaluated the works together. Let's see. So this is another intermediate project that was inspired by our new and working extruder that I got in my classroom. So I had students use hollow tubes to create a piece. That was the objective. So this student was inspired by ocean textures and manipulated the extruded tubes to mimic textures inspired by her beach trips. And then the student on the left, her piece was initially inspired by negative space inside of a beehive, but as the project progressed, she formed new ideas that morphed into these twisting layers of hollow hexagons. And the student on the right used the objective to create organic movement by making a sea anemone. So for the sake of time, I'm going to move a little faster through these next images, since by now you can see the setup and the structure of my projects. And in this project for my advanced ceramics class, I had them explore the idea of dwellings. So that was the objective. We discussed different types of dwellings: spiritual, emotional, physical. We made mind maps. We talked about where our minds dwell and where we want to dwell. And this student created a giant fish with a mouth like a cave and put a small bear inside to play on that dwellings idea. And these students took 2 different paths to the dwellings idea. One wanted a more functional vase form and hid a human face inside to represent hiding inside of a dwelling. And the other focused on dwelling in the mind and represented both the left and the right sides of the brain. So each of these students met the objectives I gave them. They met the objectives that I know they need to meet, such as the technical objectives, and made wonderfully creative works. All right, for the last project I want to show you, I asked my students to tell a story through stacking at least 3 objects or utilizing 3 elements. So students could create functional works, sculptural works, and they could use any building method that they enjoyed. So this was a 9th grade student in her first sculpture class who wanted to show the story of Alice in Wonderland. So because I had my archives of videos ready for her, she was able to coil build, hollow out the rabbit, and use slabs to create the other elements. So if I had limited her to just coil building or slab building, she wouldn't have been able to do a project like this. So both of these students chose to show narratives through animals. One showed the idea of good and evil through the deer, and then the other was a senior thinking about leaving for college. She was contemplating the idea of wisdom taking flight as she prepared for the years ahead. And on the left, this student showed the story of Jack and the Beanstalk through stacking the story elements. And on the right, this student showed the anticipation of a kingfisher waiting for its next meal. All right, so these are some images from my AP work over the years, and this is a result of students pursuing choice-based learning and where it comes to fruition. So if you teach AP, I strongly encourage you to structure your classes so that most pieces can work towards an AP portfolio later on. Some of my AP students have even used projects from the 8th grade in their portfolios. So it's incredibly difficult to come up with the number of pieces required and still maintain a high level of quality. But if you plan ahead, you can take a lot of pressure off students so that they can create freely. So in these slides, you can see students combine all sorts of techniques such as throwing, sculpting, coil building, and carving. And all of their research and ideas are coming together in a time of true exploration. So I encourage each of you to incorporate a little bit of choice-based learning into your classroom. So start with where you are comfortable and work your way forward. I've seen great improvements in my classroom and student work since I've started teaching like this. And I have most of these images on my website, and I'm happy to share any information, images, lessons with you. I have cards with me. We may have time for maybe one question if you have any questions. And if not, I'll be in the back after, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. So thank you so much. Are there any questions real quick? I'm sorry. Okay. Oh, I'll answer the rest after.
Just quickly, I missed the first few minutes. Is your class structured by the semester or the year? Like beginning is one semester, intermediate is one semester, or is it a full year?
The clay classes are by semester, and then like my middle school is all year. Okay, one more question?
How does your assessment support your risk-taking, particularly in your rubrics?
My rubrics are actually quite general, and I make sure I give them to my students ahead of time. So it usually covers technical ideas, I think looking at the 3D form, elements and principles, and craftsmanship, I believe. But I also have those, and if you email me, I'm happy to email it to you. So I keep it pretty general so that students have that freedom to really meet the requirements. So, okay, I think we're out of time. Thank you so much. Appreciate you being here.